everyone, and welcome to the Quality Management Summit meeting. My name is Sandra, and I will be moderating today's call. Our speaker today is Carl Johansen, Section Manager, Utility Shared Services Quality Management, Consolidated Edison Company of New York, presenting Quality Professional, Old Function, New Competencies, Building a Highly Effective Team. We will turn to the presentation in just a moment, but first I want to go over the web conference instructions. Everyone is currently in mute so that the background noise does not become distracting for the other participants. To view today's presentation as the screens change live, you may go to the link that was sent to you in your reminder email. Once in there, you may click anywhere on the page. Everyone see the pop-up with the option to make a comment? Feel free to ask questions by clicking on any slide, and we'll make sure all of your questions are answered. For the newer participants in the group, it might be useful to review some of the main benefits you can take advantage of as a member at no additional charge. First are the live monthly web conference meetings, which you've already dialed into today. I hope you find these useful, and we have an excellent lineup, which you can see by going to our website's schedule page. Second, we do record all of these, so if you are traveling or stuck in another meeting, simply log in at your leisure, and the full archives of past meetings are available to you with a number of interesting topics. Third, get to know the other members. By logging in, you can see all of their profiles, and we are glad to make any introductions if wished. Fourth, if you are wrestling with any key issues or decisions, we strongly encourage you to reach out to the other members. Also, our site makes it very easy to post questions. The seniority and experience of your fellow members makes this the best possible forum to get advice from others who have probably dealt with the same issues and can give you sound advice on what worked and what did not. Fifth, we really encourage site visits. If you have not visited others' offices to have a great discussion on best practices and see their facilities, please do so. You can log in to see the other members' companies and cities, so feel free to reach out, or as mentioned, we are happy to make introductions. Sixth, we also generate executive summaries of meetings, including the key takeaways and learning nuggets so that you can reference them and put them right into action. Seventh, our members are very busy, so we started a service where we pick out the top 6 most interesting articles among thousands at hundreds of sites to keep you abreast and ensure you don't miss the key ones. Lastly is our Book of the Month summary that you can either read or listen to as you commute. Each month we will be selecting the most interesting book, then summarizing the ideas, so within minutes you can absorb the key takeaways. There are many other benefits, of course, but I just wanted to highlight some and keep a lookout in your inbox for a number of these each month. That takes care of the housekeeping items. If you'll just give me a few moments to now pull up the speaker's presentation and introduce him. Okay, all set. Now before I turn the call over, I would like to tell you a little bit about our speaker today. Carl Johansen, also known as the Bearded Guru, is a quality and risk management subject matter expert with over 12 years experience in program development. In his current role at Edison, Carl is the Section Manager for the Utility Shared Services Quality Management Department and the Program Manager for the company-wide certification of its Environmental Management System to ISO 14001. Carl is applying skills honed in the manufacturing industry to the energy and utility sector to help Edison achieve its objectives. Carl holds a Bachelor of Industrial Technology specializing in electromechanical and a Master's of Technology Management specializing in Six Sigma and Lean Management from Central Connecticut State University. You may read Carl's full bio sent to you in your reminder email. Carl, thank you so much for being with us today. Just say next when you wish the slides to advance, and the floor is all yours.
All right, thank you very much. So thank you for having me today. It's definitely an honor and a pleasure to present today. So I always like starting off with a little joke in the bio because I just find bios kind of interesting. So the bearded guru was a lost bet, so I apologize. But so today we're here to talk about some of the the kind of things that we find risks that we're seeing in our industry from what quality professionals used to be to kind of what they're turning into. And the talent shortage, and so how do we get to build effective teams? And so this is something we've been working on, something we put a lot of thought into over the last couple of years, and so we're kind of building out this idea. So we'd love to kind of walk you through where we've been, kind of where we are, and to go forward. So I'm also not seeing the slides on the screen. I don't know if that's just me.
You might need to refresh. Try that and let's see if that helps.
Okay, there we go. Next slide, please. All right, so what are our objectives today? So today we want to talk a little bit about, Con Edison. So the utility sector in general is something that we do, and you kind of talk quality. They're not really as mentioned as much as clearly manufacturing kind of sector. So we're going to go over a little bit about what we are and what we do and where we do it. And then we'll kind of go into learning about the competency framework that we've kind of put together and how we're trying to develop that. And ways that we can improve kind of what we've already built. After that, we want to talk about, now that we kind of build these things and we kind of thought about this a lot, how do we put it into practice? So this is building a team, so we have to talk about attracting the talent that we need to kind of do this, as well as developing our existing teams, right? So there's going to be a twofold to that. Next slide, please. So Con Edison, where are we, right? So we're in New York City. We have the pleasure of lighting and powering New York City, basically for almost 200 years. We're coming up on our 200th anniversary in a few years. So we did begin as what the company was called the New York Gas and Light Company in 1823. So since then, we've kind of merged into, obviously, electric, gas, and then we'll talk about some of our steam business. So currently we're operating around $12 billion in annual revenue and around $50 billion in assets. The company itself is comprised of 4 big subsidiaries. The 2 highlighted in blue are the ones we're going to really concentrate on today. These are the regulated utility industries. Consolidated Edison Company of New York is really the primary focus. They're about 95% of the revenue. So on the little picture on the right here, just for those of you who may not be familiar with the area, the Consolidated Edison Company of New York, or Con Ed, is comprised of 604 square miles. So we're not talking about a lot of real estate geographically, but there is a lot to do clearly in here. So we have the little blue areas, New York City proper. The peachish color is going to be what we call Lower Westchester County, and then we have the Upper Westchester, which is in green. So we're kind of nestled between New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. That's where New York City kind of represents. So the biggest part of our commodity is going to be the electric system. So within the 604 square miles, we have around 3.4 million electric customers with a peak demand of a little over 13,000 megawatts, which was achieved a couple of years ago. So as you can imagine, New York being New York, there's a lot of demand for power. There's not a lot of place to put things. So, we do a lot of energy efficiency and stuff like that, which my group helps with as well. So to kind of get this all done, I found some fun facts, between some of the public reports that we offer. And, we have over 95,000 miles of underground cable. As one would imagine, you're not going to have utility poles in New York City, in the Manhattan areas or any of the big kind of peak city centers. So we have a lot of underground cable in this, kind of small geographical area, and just some more fun facts. With the transformers, these are all usually in manholes. There are some above ground, and then we get into our overhead systems, right? So these are the way we provide electric, which most of the country does as well. So these are the kind of utility poles, wires strung around, which you'll find primarily on Staten Island within New York City, and definitely the Westchester County. Next slide, please. Next slide.
We're on 4. You may need to refresh again.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not refreshing. Yeah, sorry. So a little bit more about our system. We do primarily electric, right? But we also do gas and steam. So with the gas system, we have a little bit over 1 million customers, throughout that general area. And, we kind of get that done with over 8,000 miles of pipes. I just like adding fun facts to these types of things because they're still mind-boggling that, this gas travels through our pipelines at a little over 15 miles per hour. It's just one of those mind-boggling facts that you just don't know. The gas is just always there. It just works, and, we kind of just do it. So kind of knowing these are always little fun tidbits about our business. Over on the right side, this is something that a lot of people actually don't know about New York City, unless you're in the industry, but we do operate the largest district energy system in the United States, and we provide steam service to over 1,650 customers in Manhattan. So this goes from Lower Manhattan up to 96th Street. And when we say 1,650 customers, it seems a little bit lower than, obviously the other ones were in the millions, but one customer would be the Chrysler Building. One customer is the Empire State Building. So when we say one customer, obviously we're impacting hundreds of thousands of people potentially within that one service. We do achieve this with over 105 miles of mains and service pipes. And this number I still can't get my head around, even though I've been here for a few years now, is peak output is 8 million pounds per hour of steam. I don't even know, how you calculate that or how that even gets calculated, but I mean, that's kind of an astonishing number, so I always like to put that in. So when you talk about steam business, when we're talking about quality, this isn't actually an FDA-regulated product. So when, we have a lot of the alphabet soup that regulates us, we can throw the FDA in there as well. So what we use steam for, heating, hot water, obviously, but we also use it in some of the hospitals for sterilization. And then, believe it or not, air conditioning. So we do on-site generation with steam, as well as evaporative cooling. So, and to kind of produce this, we actually use municipal water, right? So we use 3.5 to 4 billion gallons of water every year. And that water, even though it's municipal, is drinking water, it's still not clean enough for us to, maintain those FDA standards. So, we kind of have a in-house for each of our steam plants that are, cleaning that water. Next slide, please. So that gets us to where I'm at. So what we do as a utility shared services, I was tasked a couple of years ago to build this department, and these 5 business units kind of comprise what we call utility shared services. So we have a $2.8 billion supply chain. So within the supply chain, we have risks, to quality, where we're talking about fraud instances, right? There's publicly available information on how well we have not done in the past for fraud. So this is definitely something that our kind of senior management is really kind of concerned about. Then we get into our facilities and field services business unit. This business runs, we have 5 major hubs, if you will, or kind of regional location offices. Those are, multiple thousands of people are working in each of those offices, and then we have another about 75 field locations that our facilities folks are responsible to take care of building maintenance. And then on the other side of the field services, we have a certified, what they call a TSDF or has waste, manage that on site. We have our entire fleet is run out of here, our transportation. So we have a lot going on now from a quality perspective and risk perspective in this group. Then we go to our 3rd business unit, which is emergency preparedness. So when you talk about companies such as Edison being in where we are in New York City, obviously being prepared to respond to emergencies is kind of critical and core to our business function. So when you're talking about quality, right, a lot of times we kind of get hung up on quality of the widgets that we produce, and that makes clearly we need to do that. But when you get into the process side of quality, some of the tools are less developed, some of the ideas are less developed. So this is where this really becomes a critical thing. We're talking about quality and why we need the core competencies, which we'll talk about a little bit. I actually happen to report directly to the vice president of this organization for now, and we're kind of working with them. Next business unit we have is corporate security. They are doing physical security for all of our locations and our people. So again, as you can imagine, New York City is and was and still remains to be a target for nefarious acts. So our physical security requirements have to be up to snuff, have to be monitored, measured, and tracked to make sure that they're adequate. And then we get into the fun side. We have research and development. These are the folks that are kind of developing new technologies, not only for us, but actually for our industry. We hold many patents on different kind of industry-specific tools, techniques, and things. And, one of the most recent developments that we have is actually related back to our steam business. These boilers that we use, these big package boilers to produce the steam, they're over 8 stories tall and require maintenance and inspection. So Every time we need to do a maintenance on these boilers, we have to build scaffolding inside, and and make sure that we can get at it. It's very labor intensive. It's very offers different safety features that that could happen. So they're actually working on drone technology, right? So there's a lot of good use for drone technology. They've kind of developed a new thing where we're kind of sending drones up to inspect and do visual inspection. So that's another kind of way to illustrate continuous improvement, but also some quality. Next slide, please. So here's our problem, right? Do more with less. I feel like this is being a service group within a service organization. You can imagine that this is always the task, right? It's something that when you talk about the lean principles, right, you're either value-added, non-value-added, but necessary, or waste, right? So we'd like to think of all of us as value-added, but by definition, we're not necessarily directly contributing to the bottom line of the company. So therefore, we fall into that second category of non-value-added, but necessary. So when you're talking about building a team for these 5 business units, that seems like a daunting task, but when you look at it, you're not going to get the 15 people that you want in our industry. It's just not going to happen. So what do you do, right? We've asked these questions. We have a talent shortage kind of going on in the industry as well. So we ask the questions of, so how do we build a program that we can kind of scale to group size, so sections or departments, and then kind of even major or organization size. So we kind of came up with these ideas, competencies or core competencies, and we were building a framework around that to kind of answer and help us answer that question of how do we do more with less. Next slide, please. So when you talk about the 5 buckets, we've kind of come up with these 5 buckets, and started off at the the core level. We actually start at the bottom here, so at the core, it's culture and ethics. And as you'll see, we'll go into and explain each one of these. But when you get into the culture and ethics of something, understanding what and how to operate in organizations that you're within is kind of vital. Then we move into risk and compliance. So this is, an idea that everything is risk-based, whether we understand that we're doing and making decisions based on risk. Typically we are. And then compliance, right? We are regulated by everyone. I mean, there's hundreds of regulators. Any acronym you can throw together, that's 3 letters. We're probably regulated by them in some way. So kind of understanding compliance obligations kind of drives into the next bucket, which is quality and lean. So how do you do these things? How do you know your customer? How do you know your your influencers? These are the traditional quality professional tools and techniques kind of lie within this bucket. Even down to some of our QC folks that are running around with mics and miking things and testing things. Then we get into kind of the 2 bigger global kind of strategies, which are digital and infosec. So digital is kind of a buzzword that's kind of been going around the industry for the last couple of years, but it's really the idea of this new concept of technology. When used to be you would read on resumes that I'm proficient in Office or I know Excel, and so that's good, but we're in such a further kind of a long area that we kind of just loop this into digital. And then info security. It's the greatest risk out there for most companies, and especially a company like us. We are continuously attacked by foreign bodies being in New York City and running a utility, and they are exponentially increasing. So we'll talk about what InfoSec means even at the section level for us. And then lastly, kind of the overall branch of this is the idea of what competencies do we need, and the idea of strategy and governance. Far too often we're very good in tool sets, but lack the governance and lack that strategic direction to kind of make that all work well. Because you can have the best tool, but if the process isn't stout, and then the project management of whatever you're doing and the governance isn't stout, the chances of that process being successful is limited. Next slide, please. So here we put together this model. So the basic model is we have that competency category, which we'll show on the left, and we'll kind of go through them. And within those competencies, where you've identified as a team a couple core capabilities, these are kind of major themes within that category, and then there's some specific skills that we want to kind of attract or look at and monitor throughout those capabilities. So we've kind of put together we'll walk through each one of these after this, and really this is the model that is built to be scalable as well. So again, if you want to look at what we call a section level, which is the lowest grouping of kind of team, and then they're within departments and organizations and so on, these are now scalable to each one of those. So if you wanted to kind of monitor some of the things we'll talk about a little bit later, it's really valuable for us to scale this, because we don't want to make it work for our team. We want to make it work for the company in general. Next slide, please. So starting at the core, as I mentioned, culture, ethics. This is something that is far too often overlooked, in my personal opinion. You can turn on any news cycle today, and respect for people is dwindling at a rapid rate. It's starting to seep into the workforce, and this is something that I think we need to kind of make sure that we correct and correct. So respect for people, that's a capability that involves active listening, and I'm guilty of this too. I've been working on this. This is one of the competencies that I'm working on myself, the ability to listen and to truly listen, not to respond, but to listen, to actually have a conversation and understand what that person's talking about. And then focus on process, not people. Far too often we say, Tom did it, Susie did it, it's their fault, the ones who messed up. Well, you really kind of got to get away from that. Is the process built well enough? Is it stable enough for them to do their job effectively? So respect for people is kind of the crucial one that we want to start off with during this kind of capability or this culture and ethics bucket, followed very, very closely by integrity. There's no way that there's tons of ways I should say to define it, but this is the one that I've really liked personally. Lots of famous people have quoted something similar to this, but this is the kind of definition that kind of I go with, and it's that idea of having the Constitution to do the right thing when nobody's looking, especially when you're building a quality in a risk group. This is something that is very integral to that, to say you have access to data that the mass populace of the company may not have access to. So making sure that you're handling that data appropriately, that leads down to the integrity. And then lead with humility. So as a leader myself, and then as all of my team members are actual leaders in their own way, whether we're holding a workshop or facilitating some kind of quality and improvement exercise, you have to be able to ask questions, listen carefully. I make my team learn something new every day and kind of report on it and say, hey, I read this really good article about this tool. And this idea of continuously learning and then applying that when we actually lead, whether it's a workshop, or whatever, it makes the people you're talking with more engaged. It makes them more energized. They make them feel respected, that you're not there to talk at them. You're there to talk with them and to understand with them. This goes a really long way to not only building the culture of the company, but kind of promoting that value and actually start to do change shift in culture. Next slide, please. Risk and compliance. Clearly, again, this is more of a foundational type thing. What we look for from a competency perspective in two major capabilities is this idea that there are risk concepts frameworks. There is a language to this. There is a taxonomy to this. So we need to kind of understand that, where we don't want to have to train people on some of these languages that they could have learned before, or we want to assess where they are in that learning curve. So these are things like COSO, ISO 31000, and so forth. They each offer their own language. And then there's kind of terms and definitions specifically when you're talking about risk categorization, with Basel being the example. And then we get into the risk assessment and reporting side. When you're talking about risk assessment techniques, right, these are the tools that anybody can look up online, to be quite honest. So there's no more IP and talking about this is the tool and you need to, this is what I'm selling you. It's really about having that knowledge to wield that tool appropriately. That's way more valuable, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. So there's qualitative, quantitative, there's dynamic, ongoing. So knowing which tool to use and leverage in the right time for the right process. These are the kind of things that we're looking for. Result reporting. This is also one where, so you can do this work, it's far often in spreadsheets or tools that look like spreadsheets. How do you make that presentable, right? Nobody wants to look at spreadsheets when you're presenting stuff. It's just not something that's very pleasant to look at typically. So we look at what their capabilities are there. And then tailored messaging. So this is a really big one that we wanted to put in here, and this is the idea where we could be presenting to our line organizations, right? We have over 8,000 union scopes that could be getting this presentation, and what does risk mean to them? It's not the same conversation I'm going to have with a middle management team, an executive team, or the CEO, right? We have to make sure that we can tailor our message and tailor our results to say the same thing, but in different ways, that it's adopted and kind of internalized by the group we're presenting with. Next slide, please. So now get into the bulk, right, or that central theme of what a quality professional used to do. This slide could quite literally be pages long, obviously, of all the tools and techniques in there, but the first two major capabilities are like, do you even know about these standards? There are quality tools, there's techniques, there's metrics. So standards like ISO 9001, you can also add in on any of the automotive-specific adaptations of these standards, or aerospace, what have you. Every industry has quality standards built around it. So for our industry, it's, you kind of have 9001 as the kind of major framework, and then there are some nuclear ones and some other things like that we can just be aware of. Obviously, traditional quality tools and concepts, this is the one that would make this list massively long. But if you're looking at something that's as base and rudimentary quality process mapping, can you map out a process? These are kind of some of those core skills that we're looking for, as well as metric KPI design, right? A quote that gets quoted, I believe, very often is what gets measured gets managed. I believe the actual quote from Drucker is what gets measured gets improved. So it's the idea that we want to make sure, are we measuring the right things? Why are we measuring them? Are our KPIs actually indicative of key performance, or are they just something easy to count, right? Do 10 of these, do 12 of those. It's about the value added metric, so having some kind of capability built into that is definitely helpful, I think, for any group or any organization, but especially one who's tasked with building a quality department. So then my background a lot is in lean as well, so I was lucky enough to find a program with a lot of practitioners teaching it who do it professionally. So and I was taught it as a management system. It's not just lean tools. There is kind of a philosophy that goes around this. So knowing some of those tools and concepts are clearly going to be helpful. Again, listing a few Kaizen just in time. There's hundreds of these things, but when you talk about Kaizen, this is something that we've been preaching, I think, internally a lot, where we get into this daily kata, or this daily routine of improving something, right? Whether it's the way my team handles themselves in some instances, try to improve something every day, that gets habitual, and then that leads into just better work and better process. Next slide, please. So now we get into this new one, right? So digital and infosec, short for info security. So we've broken this up into three kind of major buckets or major capabilities within this category. And so basic to digital, right? So being really good at PowerPoint and Excel, those now fall into basic, where we've just moved on from, being competent in these things are kind of get you through the door, and a lot of that we do. Well, yes and no, it will. You kind of need to know things now. It's not something that, is really a skill. So I've read a lot of resumes where they list Excel, let's say, specifically as something that they're kind of proficient in. And then during an interview, I'll ask them to explain simply what a VLOOKUP does. And they can't answer that question. So this is, to me, you'll see this on almost every resume, that they have these proficiencies, but when you actually get into that and when you test them on that, those proficiencies aren't maybe as good as they think. So we kind of lump that into basic digital. Then we get into what we call advanced digital. So this is where you're starting to hear data analytics come into play, right? So there are many, many tools out there. Some of the ones that we use at Con Ed are going to be things like Tableau or Domo, which is a competitor. These are programs that can take many data sources together, lump them together, and then you can kind of do nice reporting that's clickable, it's drillable. They're usually like a live service type thing. And then we also go into the bigger platforms like Oracle, where we use the BI tool that's off Oracle. And the big player here is this thing called GRC technology. So this is governance, risk, and compliance programs. We currently here are in the middle of implementing, we're 2 years into implementing this enterprise platform. We happen to choose RSA Archer as our platform. It is one of the bigger industry leaders. There are others. So what this does, and having any skill in this is vital to the work we do as a quality department as well. Is this kind of gets in your regulations. So what is your regulation intake, or what are your compliance obligations? Then it links those to what the business objectives are. Then you relate that to the risk, and then it relates that to the testing, right? So that's where we come in the quality side. If all of that is predetermined and linked, it makes our job easier to say, this is what defined quality is, this is what we expect it to do, and this is what we want out of it. That allows us to go in the system and, kind of manage all of this information in one place, where previously it's managed kind of disparately throughout the company, different spreadsheets, PowerPoints, and, and all that good office stuff. So that's advanced digital. And then we get into digital hygiene, right? Data privacy. This is massive. We have little, I would say, not little, but less exposure to this, since we are very much a New York City-based operation. Some of our suppliers are overseas, but when you talk about laws of GDPR in Europe, California just passed one as well, a very similar law. Data privacy is something that we need to be cognizant of when we're building these programs. Are we asking for the data that may be compromised, or do we need this data? These are things that, being aware that this is a risk that's kind of unfolding right before our eyes. It's rapidly advancing, so kind of being aware of these things. Phishing, clearly this is something that would allow people to access to us. So what's their digital hygiene privacy? Are they used to looking for outside sources? Are they tagging outside emails? Are they being diligent? These types of questions. Social posting, right, about work. So we live in a social area or a social time, and there's far too often we see people kind of posting things that maybe they shouldn't be posting. So it's either kind of confidential information about the company that they may not realize that they took a selfie or asked or something, right? There could be something on the walls. So again, you're just asking, are they aware? Is this a skill that they have to be cognizant of what they're doing when they're doing it? And then we threw records retention in there. This is something that, as a company that's almost 200 years old, I think we were there when Iron Mountain was built, right? We own a very large part of Iron Mountain. Do we need to keep all that stuff there? Do you have kind of an idea of what records retention means and how that applies to the processes that you're helping design and then manage quality of? Next slide. So now we get into the bigger buckets, strategy and governance. So this idea of organizational context, this comes from a lot of the ISO standards now, where you have to understand the context of the organizations. We've done a lot of work with this in the ISO 14000 world for our EMS. So we've designed these things called these aspect statements or organizational aspects. So these are understanding really the kind of major 5 factors. You have internal and external influencers. You have your own business bias at the company or at that organization or in that department of that organization. So what's the appetite of the company? And as a utility, we are traditionally a very kind of conservative company in the way that we're going to approach anything. So we're not making massive decisions, at a higher speed. We want to kind of play it closer to the vest. We also put planning and project management into this bucket as well. So it's this idea that since we are going to be facilitating kind of bigger things as a group, where we're setting goals for ourselves, but we're also setting them for our program teams and our project teams. And can you work on milestone-based project management? And have you ever developed a mission vision kind of statement? So these are some of the skills that we've kind of identified that would be helpful for us to have a more lean team and a more productive team. And these are kind of the major themes of it. Next slide, please. So when we go into, now that we've kind of talked about a little bit of what we did to kind of first cut through this and since applied a little bit, the next steps of kind of continually evolving this idea. This is not something that has been a one and done. This is something we're kind of in the middle of at the moment from a project perspective. So that's why I thought it would be kind of interesting to kind of see what you're, where we are and on. So the next step is to, identify more of those skills to say, are there kind of bigger job categories that we want to talk about if we're talking about linemen versus quality professionals versus risk professionals or, whatever that we have in our company or your companies. So kind of assess your skills based on that. And assign them to internal job titles. So, one of the things from a development perspective, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is the idea of having a development plan for your people is almost as important as attracting the right talent, or even in most cases, more important. So assigning these things to job titles to say, well, if you hit this base threshold of an experience level, you can then kind of, get that title or get that promotion. So there's that inline promotion capability. And so from the competence assessment, we're looking at a traditional type 5 levels of a maturity assessment framework. Again, this is just draft. This is kind of where we landed at the moment, but you can have anywhere from absolutely no working experience in any of these skills and, with no credential, all the way up to subject matter expertise with a credentialed individual. So, and then you have those obviously varying ways in between. So we thought a lot about it. We wanted to make sure that we got credit for all the types of credential versus non-credential and experience versus non-experience together in 5 buckets, right? So a lot of the folks that we deal with are lifers at our company. They've been there. We have one guy that just retired with 53 years of experience. So how do you lump that into somebody who has this whether it's a degree or a credential? They're just as much a subject matter expert, or probably even more. But some things do require credentials, right? So we have to be cognizant of that as well. Next slide, please. So this is just a graph of kind of how and why we're going with this. We're looking at, let's say, the average competency of a team. So this could be, a team of 5, it could be a team of 20, it could be a department. And what it does is it allows each department to see where the average is. And then you could throw another line in here and say, this is what, I need as a core competency for this particular, for this function of this department. You can kind of see where you are, right? You can kind of see where you need to work on and what you want to do. So this is just kind of a next step of what we're building out and what our goal is, to get here, which we'll come back to this chart actually a little bit later. Next slide, please. So now that we've talked about the competencies and kind of what we're looking for in individuals, right, it seems like it's a daunting task, and it is a lot of things that we're looking for, but how do you attract high talent? Next slide, please. So going back to quality 101, right, it's all about the customer. It's knowing what the customer expectations are. And in this day and age, the talent is the customer. This is a market that is driven basically by choice of the talent. It's not an employer, like you're lucky to have a job offer from me market anymore. So you got to look at who's available and what their needs are. This is the first time in history, I believe, that we have, I think it's actually even 5 generations of different folks that are working together. So the Gen Zs are coming into it now. You have the millennials, which I happen to be on the cusp of, technically a millennial, but I'm also, on the cusp of Gen X. So I'm the brunt of a lot of millennial jokes, but I can say we work just as hard. We just have to get that, that need. Our need is to always work hard to make sure what we do matters. We're not just going to go in and punch a clock, where as you get to some of the other generations, it was more about stability, having the job. Now it's about, I need to do things that are that matter to not just me, but matter to the business, that matter to the public in which we serve. And kind of understanding these things is vitally important to attracting the right people. Culture matters ever more. Socioeconomic factors, right? So the money matters, but you also have to be cognizant of what you're doing from the community perspective. Luckily, at Con Ed, we have a really good outreach program where there's not a day, I think, on the calendar that there was not some type of volunteer event. There's not something, some group that we partner with, that we're meeting with our stakeholders. So we've clearly, being in New York City, this is something we have to do. This is a core business function. For some companies, it may not be. Sustainability practices, too. This comes up a lot in the manufacturing world, where folks were kind of outsourcing some of their, let's say, dirtier processes to countries. That's no longer acceptable. You can't do that and not expect to get called out on it. If you ship something overseas, you're responsible for, not only the environment stuff, but, you have to be fiscally aware of, what that impacts could be on your business, even though it's not your core business that are doing it. And work-life balance, right? It's not all about, when people hear this, they think about ping pong tables at Google, right? This isn't what we're talking about, although I guess it's always fun to play ping pong, but you're really talking about, can you be productive in a different type of work environment, right? And this is changing in my core business, and you're talking about business resiliency and business continuity. It used to be a bigger problem. If our headquarters went down, what do? That's 3,000 or 4,000 people that have to be relocated or just not come in or do something. You have the ability to work from home. You can work from a Starbucks. It doesn't matter where you work from. obviously unless you have to be hands-on, but knowing work-life balance and knowing that you can actually say, I'm going to let you work from home because, we have that trust, we have that mutual respect. And for me personally, when I run our team, we talk about performance. We don't talk about the time. So there's tons of people that can sit at their desks for 45, 50 hours a week and actually be less productive than people who work, from home 2 or 3 days a week. So we have to be cognizant about that. People want this. Next slide, please. So it's not showing up on my screen. Let me refresh. Sorry about that. So there is data on this slide, but it's still not showing up for me. So on the left-hand side, I don't know if anybody can see it, but it's really 76% of hiring managers say they provide clear job descriptions. Well, that's not what people that are actually, the candidates think. They're only saying 36% of the time that they actually say the same thing. So this is a big gap that we need to kind of start addressing, and we are guilty of this as well. We've been working on this with HR to kind of get better job descriptions and try to make them more effective. So whenever there's a gap, when you're talking about what candidates understand from your job descriptions to what you think you're doing well in your job descriptions, you have to kind of understand that disparity and kind of work on it. Next slide, please. So I like this quote because I have a good example too. So when you turn a job description into a bucket list of requirements, literally what I was just talking about, right? That's just what you want to talk about. You really want to make sure that you're not driving away the top performers because you want all these skills. What that assessment is meant to be is to say, this is something that you do after the job description. It's not meant to give you an even bigger list of things to put in these job descriptions, because you will lose people, right, if they don't check off a box. In the perfect example that I have, even at our company, is we had a requirement that you had a 4-year degree for an IT slot, right? Okay, well, we had a couple of people apply. I happen to have known these people were going to apply. They have their CCNA credential for networking. They have a bunch of info security credentials. They don't have a 4-year degree, right? So they spent their time on kind of being very specific in their industry. So if somebody from, and I use this college because I have a friend that went through this program, but Green Mountain College in Vermont has a 4-year degree in recreational sports. That is a thing. He runs a YMCA, so it makes a lot of sense for him. But if that person applied over the one who actually has InfoSec and, let's say networking credentials, that person gets auto-bumped versus the person with the degree gets auto-in. This is something that, we caught and we're addressing now internally, but your systems may be doing this and you may not even be aware of it, so you could be losing talent based on what you put as required. So just be cognizant of that. Next slide, please. So let's try get rid of job descriptions. Let's call it performance requirements, right? So list what the person and the individual that you want is actually going to help do. This is what success looks like. We're responsible for running my department. What does quality look like? Well, quality looks like means that we offer as a shared service. We offer what the customer wants. We meet their expectations. This is the performance, and these are some of the ways in how we do that. Because then they're getting a better feel for what the job actually entails, rather than just a list of things that they may or may not be, have or be aware of from a skills perspective. Next slide, please. So you're selling the company, right? This is a buyer's market. You are selling the company. From a recent LinkedIn survey, 83% of talent says a negative interview experience can change their mind about a company they once liked. So they could think that you're very socially responsible, they love you, great company, they got that ping pong table, you go through the interview process and you're not involved, you're kind of just going through the run of the motions. This isn't something that, it doesn't meet their expectations because they have such a high expectation of you. This isn't good, but it's all not bad news. Next slide, please. 87% of that same talent in that same survey say if that had a positive interview experience, they could change their mind about that role. The company once doubted. So this is really good, right? So as a utility, we are not the flashy tech companies of the world, or we're not making widgets necessarily. So we don't have that flashiness to kind of go on. So people are coming to us for stability and kind of being in a 200-year-old company. So I wanted to make sure when I hired my team that this was something that was a positive interview experience. I made sure that I was ready, I was prepared, my team, I had a couple of people with me hiring. I wanted to make sure that they were prepared, they knew the game plan, we had an inviting setting, we had a nice conference room, some water and stuff like that available. It wasn't just, in a closet, doing these kind of interviews to get them one and done. And it does matter, guys. Next slide, please. So when we talk about, the new hires, right? We kind of talked about that a little. That matters. But what about your existing teams, right? This almost matters, like I said, more. Next slide, please. So coming back to this chart, so what does this help us do when we get this populated by, that you can aggregate it by section, department, organization, business unit, whatever. This allows you to help develop a individual development plan. Next slide, please. So as you can see from, that sample data, let's say somebody is really big in, employee 2 is really big in one of the areas but kind of lower in the other areas. And that may be okay, but they may want to get better in the other areas, right? They might meet that baseline that we talked about where you have to be a base level 1 or 2 or whatever in some of these competencies. But, that's something that they want to say, well, there's a pay bump for me potentially, or this is something that I want to learn more about. You now have that roadmap and that data to kind of help them make that decision. And then as a manager, it makes your job easier as well because you know that there's tools and techniques out there and that there's things that you can do. And that allows us, I think, to be in a better place to build that culture. Next slide, please. So lastly, we talked a lot about the competency piece and about the ability to do work, right? You can have the most competent person on the planet, but they may not work well with others. That's a bigger problem than competency. So when you develop the competency tools, there was less out there, I think, from at least our research when we were looking into this. So we kind of built our own. But when you talk about this other side and this team dynamic piece, there's a lot of really good tools out there that, personally my team went through. We did all of us did an MBTI profile, and we did strength finders, right? So what we did with that is we had our diversity and inclusion organization. They have a couple specialists that kind of go around the company and explain these things to you. So we all did this. We had this guy Ruben come in, who's the happiest person I've ever met, and he kind of talks about your team dynamic, about how well your personalities are going to allow you to work together. This is massive. To having a small team to be highly productive and to be highly efficient, you really need to know the picture. You can't just have competent people, because there's sometimes with competency comes ego. And you have to make sure that you can check that at the door with the right people at the right time. And all of this kind of put together so far has been leading us to really, I would say, team efficiencies and highly effectiveness for sure. We have a small team. We only have 4 people on our team, and we are doing more things in the company than our counterpart quality groups is 15, 20 people that are more legacy groups, because we have that right person. I was able to build it, and we are doing the good things. And what it all kind of comes down to, and what do we end at, is excellent customer satisfaction. At the end of the day, we are a service organization, or a service department to a service organization to a bigger company. So we are all about that customer. We need to make sure that what we provide to my staff, to my senior staff of my utility shared services, we have to make sure that what we provide is not just busy work, it's valuable, it's actionable, and building the right team allows us to do that. So with that, next slide, and I will be happy to take any questions. And I do have a beard, by the way, so I guess it works.
Thank you, Carl. We really enjoyed your presentation. Before I go out and check the chat line of questions submitted, do we have any live questions? Again, it is *6 to unmute your line and go ahead with your questions, or a reminder that you can also click anywhere on this last slide, then you will see how to make a comment, so you can type your question if wished. So again, any live questions? Okay, Carl, we have received several questions throughout your presentation. Keep in mind you may have touched on these, but I'll ask them all anyway, just in case there's something you would like to add to or elaborate on.
Sure.
Our first question: in a perfect world, quality is something the entire company strives for. Do you share and teach these competencies throughout the company, and how do you do that?
Sure. Absolutely, right. So I think quality is something that the companies, in whatever business you are, should be the goal. And I think whether people, again, understand quality or not, We do try to teach these things throughout the company. Our group actually develops what we call an intelligence report every month. We kind of put some of the key findings that we talk about and kind of categorize them into these 5 buckets, and we go on road shows too. So in that spare time that I have, which isn't much, we kind of go out and do these road shows. So we present at different staff meetings throughout the company, and we are, because I report, I'm only 3 steps away from the CEO. I'm lucky enough to be in some of those higher level meetings with a bigger kind of swath of the company. So we present at their executive meetings too. So that kind of helps proliferate the message down to which would be my counterpart level managers. And then they kind of make the request for that. And then as of right now, we are working with, after we get this kind of more hashed out and more kind of programmatic, this will be working with our HR department to kind of make sure that this is kind of part of our fiber going forward.
Thank you for that. You said you tie promotions to competencies. What do you do if someone crosses a competency threshold and there are no advanced level positions available? How do you get people to believe when that happens?
Sure. Yeah, this is something that I think we're struggling with on a few sides, right? So we are a big union shop. There is that kind of promotion line available to our union folks. So for a few years now, we've been kind of looking at how does that work for the management. So we call it union to management. So if you're not on the union, you're on the management team. And so what that means for us is that we have different band levels within Con Ed. So you can be entry-level professionals, we call band 1. And within the bands, there's a high and a low, right? So and then you have band 2 and band 3, and then band 4s, which are like director level type positions. So what we do is we allow internal inline, what we call inline promotions within the band, right? So if you're a 1L, you become a 1H. And between bands 1 and 2, there is actually an ability to inline promote from a 1 to a 2 band. And that's all at the organization's approval level. So what that means is that you're not necessarily switching the position. What you're doing is you're saying that this person is now able to be more responsible. So from a salary perspective, we kind of have handled it right now on the bonus, or what we call the management compensation plan. So if there is a target bonus for each level, and as you kind of go from an L to an H, or even from different band levels, that target for your bonus or your variable pay, as we like to call it, that target increases, right? So you're not taking the hit on the salary side. We're doing it on the bonus side, and until you actually get a promotion to a different position that will allow you to get a bump in salary in addition to your kind of annual salaries. On top of that, I would say that we do have the ability to level load your team's performance every year during our annual kind of compensation cycle. So with that, we do. There's a pot, right, for salary adjustments. There was a recent study even this year where we kind of looked at all of our, all of our bands and looked at all of the salaries as a company. Obviously, HR did this. I wasn't privy to the actual data, but I was privy to the outcome. But so they kind of were saying, all right, this group gets a bigger pot in assigning it to the right people. So doing it based on skills and based on performance, that's something that we can also help out as well. So let's say the standard rate of increase is 2.5% for every year. We can give some person, let's say 4% or 5%, based on if they've gotten a bunch of new skills in that time period. So that's something how we do without actually giving them a promotion, let's say, to a different job function.
Okay, thank you for that. Then our next question. It sounds like quality and HR are well connected at your company. Can you talk a bit about that relationship and the communication channels that allow that relationship?
Sure. So well-connected may be a stretch. I would say it's been my mission for the last probably 5 years to make this a reality. There's a good few folks that I've dealt with in HR that are not from this company originally, right? So they're not lifers. They weren't kind of out of college or out of high school into the company. So we've been working with them to kind of change hearts and minds, as you will, with people. So the way that we do that is you have to find change agents. It's in this type of culture of being a utility, we are essentially like a first responder, right? If something is going to go wrong in the city, the chances of it affecting our infrastructure is critical and probably likely. So we treat ourselves as firefighters, first responders. We have that mentality. So to kind of work on the soft skill side, as what most people would like to call these types of things, find change agents. That's the only thing I can say. Find that 1 or 2 or 3 people or that team in HR that truly believes in what they do, that don't just come in for that paycheck, that have influence over people. So we kind of go back to that governance slide where we talked about the context of the organization and understanding who those influencers are and who those change agents are. Find them. That'll allow you to kind of make inroads into that organization, and then just being open and honest with each other. For us, it's worked. I would like to say we don't have a really kind of robust relationship, but we are trying to improve that, and we're slowly steering the ship.
Okay, thank you. Now, our last question, what kind of staff changes did you see when you started moving in this direction?
So I think there's one skill that we didn't talk about that I think we've increased, and this is the ability to critically think. If I could have one skill on a resume, to be quite honest, it would be critical thinking. And we have a lot of people that we've hired on, not just in my group, but in others as well, that I've kind of shared this philosophy with. And when you interview people, this is something that I don't know if you can be taught critical thinking yet. So far, I'm leaning towards no. But we've kind of brought on a lot more people that are very, adept at making changes and learning things on the fly. So the ability to kind of continuously learn, to come in knowing that you're not that expert in what you think you may be, or you truly may be, but the idea of continuously learning and the ability to critical think, those are the folks that we see more of now, that are at least on our teams, versus some of the traditional quality teams in our company where it was looked at as a place to kind of go and retire sometimes. Again, I don't say it lightly. I think these are still great people. They put in a lot of effort and a lot of time in our company, but they're not going there because they want to be, quality professionals. They're going there because they think it's easy. So we are kind of getting away from that and kind of bringing in more kind of what I would call high-powered, high-efficiency people, good communicators, the ability to learn, and the ability to change on the fly. Those are the kind of folks that we've seen.
All right, Carl, I think we have covered everyone's questions. Do you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom you would like to share before we end our summit today?
Sure. So I think exiting, this is something that, this is a field that a lot of companies put some time into, maybe not enough time. But when you talk about quality, it really does matter for everything we do, right? It could be like us, and we're providing critical, power to New York City, keeping everything running and alive. But it could be, making parts for cars, that are critical to safety. It could be making parts for airplanes recently. It could be a lot of things. Kind of understanding and approaching quality from a different perspective and kind of looking at it more holistically, that it's not just about numbers. It's not just about stats anymore. It's not just about, different tools and techniques. It's really about that bigger picture. I would say, I don't know if we nailed it. I think we're heading in the right direction, but I think at least if we can kind of provoke some thought for you guys to say, hey, this is something, maybe we want to look at some of these other kind of buckets of competency to make sure our people are working well together, I would say at least just explore it, and I think it couldn't hurt. It can only help.
Carl, simply wonderful thoughts. On behalf of all of the executives on the line, I would like to thank you for sharing such powerful ideas and key thoughts with us today. Your involvement and dedication to our profession sets a high benchmark for others to follow. For all of the participants on today's call, thank you for your continued membership and insightful questions for today's speaker. The meeting is now officially concluded. Carl, thank you so much again, and everyone have a great day.